Hello, friends. I'm Siobhan McDonald from Granger Street Studios. I'm so glad we can spend some time together today. Let's get started with our program. Welcome to the Art of Tea Part 1. There's so much to talk about that I needed to make another program, which you will receive next month. I was surprised to learn that January is National Hot Tea Month. So there's no better time for us to celebrate this tasty and historic drink. Let me begin, though, by thanking the folks from AgeSpan for hosting this event. Please check out their website at agespan.org for all sorts of helpful links to the many different programs and services available. I'd also like to thank Right at Home Boston and North, the award-winning home health agency, for sponsoring this program and helping us all to stay safe, healthy, and connected. You can find out more info about them by visiting the website on the screen or giving them a call. Tea is the second most consumed beverage in the world after water. The U.S. consumes about 17% of the world's tea. Actually, on any given day, over 159 million Americans, including these famous folks, are drinking tea. But some people definitely drink it more than others. I guess I shouldn't be surprised that the late, great English singer-songwriter, musician, and peace activist John Lennon was reportedly so obsessed with tea that he drank 20 to 30 cups a day. The English do love their tea. Frank Sinatra was a prolific drinker and smoker. He also drank coffee or tea or something inside a coffee or tea cup, as these photos show. Before every performance, it is said that Frank liked to have a cup of tea with lemon and honey to help soothe his vocal cords. The great debate is, how milky do you like your tea? I have to say I like mine about number 3 up here, sort of right in the middle. The story of tea begins in China. According to legend, almost 5,000 years ago, the Chinese Emperor Shen Nung was sitting beneath a tree while his servant boiled drinking water, and some leaves from the tree blew into the water. He tried the infusion that his servant had accidentally created. The resultant drink was what we now call tea. In ancient China, people didn't know how to treat diseases, and many were left to die without any treatment. In order to save them, Shennong went into the mountains to test and record the effects of various herbs and medicinal plants. He tested hundreds of unique plants by extracting their juices. To counteract regularly poisoning himself, it is said that he drank tea to detoxify his body. His herbal classic is the earliest Chinese herbal textbook, and he's regarded as the founder of agriculture and medicine in China. In the beginning, tea was used in ritual offerings. Then tea leaves were eaten as a vegetable or used in medicine. On Mount Mending in Sichuan, there are mythological 7 tea trees that are still worshipped. They are protected by a tall stone wall, and 2 stone tigers guard the front and back entrances. The walls surround the 7 ancient tea trees, each more than 2,000 years old. Every year on March 27th, a ritual for the tea gods is performed at this site. In the Tang Dynasty, which is around the years 618 to 907, what we would consider medieval times, tea drinking became an art form and a drink enjoyed by all social classes. It became such a favorite that during the late 8th century, a writer called Lu Yu wrote the first book entirely about tea, the tea classic. For Lu Yu, tea symbolized the harmony and mysterious unity of the universe, and it's much more than just a book on tea. It weaves together literature, history, and art, making it the first comprehensive tea book ever written. His original manuscript was lost, but thankfully we have other early editions. It was shortly after that book was written that tea was first introduced to Japan by Buddhist monks who had traveled to China to study. The caffeine proved to keep the monks awake during long hours of meditation. For this reason, many monasteries cultivated vast tea fields. And as you probably know, tea drinking has become a vital part of Japanese culture, as seen in the development of the tea ceremony. There were Portuguese who were living in the East as traders and missionaries. In 1569, a Portuguese missionary mentioned tea in a letter to his king. But although some of these individuals may have brought back samples of tea to their native country, it was not the Portuguese who were the first to ship back tea as a commercial import. This was done by the Dutch, who in the last years of the 16th century began to encroach on the Portuguese trading routes in the East. Let's take a look at a painting made specifically for a Western audience. Tea production was a fascination for many Westerners. If you look closely, you can spot different stages of tea production, from leaf picking way up here in the upper left. It's tough to see little tiny specks of color. There are people in the fields picking the tea leaves, to crate packing that we see down here and here. This painting is in the collection of the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem. Beginning in the late 16th century, European merchants raced to thriving port cities in China, Japan, India, and the Philippines to seek their fortunes in tea, textiles, and other commodities. Salem was a major player in the China trade in the 18th and 19th centuries, and the city's prosperity was built on the exchange of goods with Asia. Salem ships returned from Asia with tea, spices, silks, porcelain, ivory, and gold dust. Here you see a painting of the Friendship, right here in the upper right, built in 1797 and eventually caught up in the War of 1812. Thankfully, the captain and crew made it safely home, but the ship was taken as a prize of war. A replica was built based on the model that you see here on the left, and this is now part of the National Park Service. That's the big image you see here. That ship actually sits in Salem Harbor, and you can visit it as a tourist. But of course, our focus remains on the art of tea and its related objects, like these figurines of a tea packer and tea porter from 1803, and this photograph of women preparing the tea leaves for drying. This painting has often been used to cite the prominent place that tea held in elite society of the early 1700s. For tea social history enthusiasts, yes, there is such a thing, it is a quintessential image, one of the earliest to depict the partaking of tea in the Western world. It's part of the Victoria and Albert Museum's vast collection. Yes, so this painting, Artist Unknown, that we're looking at is from the year 1715. And here we see what is clearly an upper class group of folks. We can see their formal clothing, the fine setting they're in, drinking tea. Let's dive a little deeper into this gem of a painting. Here we're looking at, I want to focus on this wig, or peruke it was called, or periwig. Wigs were a status symbol in the 18th century. The trend, though, really began 100 years earlier, when syphilis was rampant throughout Europe and men suffered hair loss and open sores as a result. The wig hid these embarrassing symptoms. It became a social necessity, making a brisk trade for wig makers. A wig such as the one that you're seeing here would have cost at least half a year's wages for the average Londoner. By the time this portrait was painted, though, wigs were a fashion rather than an attempt to hide a disease. They were made of a combination of horse hair, human hair, and goat hair, and dusted with aromatic powders. Aren't you glad I shared that with you? Here we're looking at some tea bowls and sauces with a sugar dish. Here it is in the painting, and here's a detail of this. China produced massive amounts of blue and white porcelain for export to Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries. Porcelain was often used for ballast on ships that carried lighter weight luxury goods such as silk and tea. There were sugar bowls on the table. Even though tea was expensive and highly treasured, it probably tasted a bit funky, having traveled in damp cargo holds of ships on a trip that could last over 8 months. The taste would have been improved with the addition of sugar, which was marketed and promoted by British sugar plantations in the West Indies. Here we're looking at the kettle in this yellow circle, and here you see a detail of it here. The kettle stays warm. They have it close to the fire. All the tea consumed at this time was from China. Tea cultivation in India wouldn't begin for another 140 years. It's time for some fun facts about tea. Tea plantations are usually located between 3,000 and 7,000 feet above sea level, which is why we don't see a lot of tea grown well in the U.S. The 1904 World Fair in St. Louis is credited with popularizing iced tea. Consumption increased during Prohibition when alcohol was illegal. Americans are obsessed with iced tea. About 80% of the tea consumed in the United States is iced. There are a few places in the U.S. that still grow tea, despite it not being an ideal place. Tea is primarily grown in China, India, and various countries around the world because of geography, labor, and climate. But South Carolina and Hawaii grow tea too. You can find tea plantations around some parts of the American South, but the climate in Hawaii is definitely better suited for harvesting tea. This was something fascinating to me. Every single tea comes from the same plant. Unlike coffee and wine, which are made with different kinds of beans and different kinds of grapes, all tea comes from the same plant. Thousands of very different tea flavors are made by rolling, oxidizing, and handling the tea leaves in various ways after harvesting. To the Boston Tea Party, Boston Harbor was shut down. I know we've all heard about the Boston Tea Party, but I found this fascinating. For weeks after the Boston Tea Party, the 92,000 pounds of tea that were dumped into the harbor caused it to smell. The British shut down the Boston Harbor until all 340 chests of British East India Company tea were paid for. This was implemented under the 1774 Intolerable Acts known as the Boston Port Act. And by the way, that outraged and unified the American colonists even more against British rule. The Boston Tea Party was the first significant act of defiance by the American colonists. The implication and impact was enormous, as you know, ultimately leading to the sparking of the American Revolution, which began in Massachusetts on April 19th, 1775. Go Massachusetts! Impressionist artists, particularly Mary Cassatt, often painted scenes of people drinking tea because it represented a common everyday social activity, allowing them to capture the subtle nuances of light and fleeting moments within a familiar domestic setting. This fits with their focus on depicting ordinary life and the impression of a scene rather than a highly detailed narrative. Why did she want to paint the guest in the act of drinking? Why cover so much of her face? And why is she looking away? The cup is tipped quite high. She must have nearly finished. And not a moment too soon, the hostess has nothing more to say to her, it seems, and possibly she is thinking to herself, I hope that's her last sip. The patient, long-suffering expression seems to say as much. I've been in this situation. I know what she feels like, and I know what this tea drinker feels like too. The silver tea service. Now here we're looking at the silver tea service that was in the painting. I'm going to back up so you can see it again. Here's the silver tea service. Here's a detail of it. And here's the actual silver tea service. This was part of a family set made in Philadelphia around 1813. 6 pieces, but not the tray, are now in the Museum of Fine Arts of Boston collection. So you can actually see this tea service from that painting, which is pretty cool. This is another work by Mary Cassatt, and this depicts Mary Dickinson Riddle, the first cousin of Cassatt's mother, presiding at tea, a daily ritual among upper middle class women on both sides of the Atlantic. Everything about her seems severe, doesn't it? Mrs. Riddle's hand rests on the handle of the teapot, part of the gilded blue and white Canton porcelain service her daughter had given to the artist's family. However, Riddle's daughter disliked the painting. She thought it portrayed her mother's nose, that you can see here, as being too big. So the painting remained with Cassatt until a longtime friend persuaded her to donate it to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York in 1923. Here are a few more of Mary Cassatt's tea paintings. Aren't they just lovely? Who would you most like to have tea with out of these 3 people? We have this first young woman who looks very friendly, leaning over to serve tea. This gentleman who, with his pipe, smoking his pipe, and I bet he has some good stories to tell. And finally, this woman who has her head tilted. She seems like she would be a good listener. Who would you most like to have tea with? Which dress do you prefer? A lot of these tea paintings show upper middle class women with just gorgeous clothing, beautiful hats, as we can see here. Do you prefer number 1 or number 2? I thought it would be fun to look at some famous tea parties. Do you know what story this is from? Yes, you're right. It's from Alice in Wonderland. In Anne of Green Gables, Anne mistakenly gives her guest alcohol at a tea party, making her quite drunk and sick. It was just a mistake, but one of the characters thinks she does it intentionally. Poor Anne. Has anyone here read Anne of Green Gables? I think I want to read it again. Such a great book. I also love the book Little Women. There is one part where Amy wants to treat the girls in her drawing class to a tea party. Apart from plain old cake, sandwiches, fruit, and coffee, she insists on the addition of cold tongue and chicken, French chocolate and ice cream, because that's what her guests are used to. But after all the expense and preparations, only one girl bothers to show up. Poor Amy. In this scene from Mary Poppins, Mary takes the children and Bert to visit her Uncle Albert, whose incessant laughter causes him to float in the air. Soon they are all laughing and floating on the ceiling and having their tea party. This is not a famous tea party, but it's a pretty cute one. These are 2 of my grandchildren, Eloise and Justice, and Eloise's favorite unicorn, enjoying a tea party together. You'll notice that this was an event one needed to dress up for. Did you like to have tea parties when you were a child? How about as an adult? Have you ever been to tea at a restaurant or hotel? And you'll notice in this picture that Eloise is looking across, and my grandson Justice is very carefully holding this teacup with 2 hands. This is Eloise's porcelain tea set. So it is breakable, and when they use it, only the older kids use it. She is very protective of it. The next time we meet, we'll talk more about teapots, look at some more artwork showing people drinking tea, and hear some more fun facts about tea. In the meantime, I hope you stay warm and cozy, and we all want to wish you a happy new year. With many thanks again to our host, AgeSpan, and our sponsor, Right at Home, Boston North. It's been great spending some time with you today. I'm Siobhan McDonald, and I wish you all a new year filled with health and happiness, with kindness and love. I'll see you next month. Goodbye, friends. Goodbye, friends. Goodbye, friends. It's time to say goodbye. Goodbye, my friends. See you soon.